Hello and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. My name is Bob Power, and on behalf of OTC Markets, as well as our co-host, Social Suite, we're very pleased you've joined us for our next live presentation from American Rare Earths Limited, a company exploring and developing rare earth elements. Please note, you can submit questions in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view a company's availability for one-on-one meetings through the Schedule Meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Mel Sanderson, President of North America of American Rare Earths Limited, which trades on the OTCQB venture market under the symbol ARRNF and on the ASX under the symbol ARR. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back here at the OTC and have this opportunity to talk about the very exciting things that we have underway at American Rare Earths, and particularly at our flagship project in Halleck Creek, Wyoming. Let me just give you a brief background on the company. As you already know, we have a full presentation available, and I do encourage you to read that. It is chock-a-block full of all of the technical details that I'm going to skip lightly over today because I want to share our most recent developments with you. But who are we? American Rare Earths is a junior company, explorer and entering development phase, and we have 3 properties in the United States. The first of which is called Searchlight. It's located in Nevada. We have the La Paz project in Arizona. And as I mentioned, we have our flagship project, Halleck Creek in Wyoming. For those of you familiar with Wyoming, and you may be asking yourself, whereabouts in Wyoming? It's located roughly between Laramie and Wheatland, so closer to the Colorado side of our border than to the Montana side. And let me tell you first a little bit about La Paz, just a little bit, because we're going to talk mostly about Halleck Creek today. We did a JORC report on La Paz back in 2021 that showed that we had, at that time where we reported, around 970 million tons of total rare earth. And interestingly, a strong presence of scandium, which is, of course, of interest, and low thorium and uranium levels. Now, let's talk about Halleck Creek. About 3 months ago, we released a JORC report at Halleck Creek that covers only 25% of our entire potential mining area. And in that 25%, our JORC showed 1.467 billion, with a B, tons of total rare earth elements. So of course, we're very excited. We've got a monster in a very good sense of the word, because starting with almost 1.5 billion in 25%, we figure we've got enough to move ahead aggressively with. There are several things that are significant about that deposit as well. The first of which is that, like La Paz, it is low in uranium and thorium. This is important from, obviously, the environmental perspective, but also it's important, excuse me, from the perspective that when we bring the project to development, that's going to be a cost and time saver for us. We will not have to get permission from the National Regulatory Agency. We won't have to engage in any kind of special storage procedures. So it's going to be a very good thing for us on all kinds of levels. It's also important to know that this deposit is very consistent from surface to depth. We've gone as far as 150 meters down so far. And we have found that we have strong and concentrated returns on all of the drill holes that we've done. So that too is exciting because it means that this project will yield itself very readily to an open pit development structure. And our metallurgy efforts, which we have been already pursuing for 3 years with wood based in Perth, show that likewise this particular rock composition will lend itself very easily to conventional processing of crushing, grinding, and concentrate solution. So that too is good news. So keeping up the good news story, what I want to do now, and by the way, I want to echo Bob's comment. Any questions that you have as I'm moving along, please go ahead and drop those in the box, because what I tend to find for myself is if I don't ask my question right away, I tend to forget my question. And there we go. We have a question asking, how did we come to acquire the deposit? Interesting, because we acquired the deposit thanks to some historical research. There are very good historical records about this particular deposit. And by the way, this same answer applies to La Paz in Arizona. Very good historical records on this area and the composition. The state of Wyoming and its geological service engaged, starting several years ago, I think almost a decade at this point, in a research project to identify what sorts of potential mining resources they had. And we discovered those archives, which are publicly available. Our geologists read through them. Sounded like a potentially interesting set of information. And so we invested in sending our geologists to the field to do some preliminary studies, staking, and then we accelerated to an initial drilling program. And those returns convinced us that we had, at the very least, a rare earth deposit of some sort. And that was how we came to acquire Halley Creek and move forward with it. So circling back to those JORC resorts, it was better than we could have imagined. And so we decided to accelerate what had always been the founding vision of the company, because the company is founded in Australia, but has always had the objective of becoming a fully American company. With those JORC resources, therefore, that we showed 3 months ago, we decided that now is the right time to pursue that Americanization strategy. So what does that involve? Well, we have hired 3 new board members, American, to bring new talent onto our board. And we're very proud to say that the new members have strong mining and financial background. I can't, unfortunately, yet tell you their names, because there's still some formalities underway in Australia in terms of bringing them fully onto the board. But stay tuned for exciting news releases. We also have hired a chief financial officer. Some of you may have seen that news release, Jose Rico, who comes to us with very strong financial credentials. We're so pleased to have him, because we are also going to be engaging in a market uplift. Here at the OTC, we will be coming on to the top layer of the QX following issuance of a series of ADRs. We expect those American depository receipts to be available for trading probably by the end of July, certainly by early August. And subsequent to that, we will manage to get our upgrade to the QX. So we're very excited by that. It opens up new horizons for potential investors who might have been having some difficulties in purchasing our shares at the current level. So we're very excited to be moving up with the OTC. We also have identified and hired a new CEO. He will be coming on board with us August 1st. So again, stay tuned for some exciting press releases identifying our new CEO as well. So at the same time, we've been working on our technical side to build and expand our portfolio, and also to further define the resource at Halley Creek. And those particular issues involve a new drilling program. So we're going to do 2 things at Halley Creek with the drilling program. We're going to continue to drill in the already defined area in order to further maximize our information about that particular 25%. We're going to go deeper because we have reason to believe that this deposit could run at least to 300 meters. So we're going to try to define that and see if that is indeed the case. We are also engaging at Halley Creek in a drilling program in a so far not well explored area to begin building out our resource. In addition to all of this, because we are an exploration company, we have been actively engaging in the search for new resources to add to our portfolio. And several of you may have seen the press announcement that came out earlier this week. We have indeed identified what appears to be a very exciting prospect, higher grade than is the case with Halley Creek, looking quite accessible, looking in some ways to have a similar composition to Halley Creek, although, of course, there are some differences. So we will be actively working to better define that potential as well. And in addition to the announced one, there are a couple of other potential projects. So our exploration activities are significant as well as we continue to grow our asset portfolio and move towards developing Halley Creek. I'm going to come right back to Halley Creek in a second, but I saw a interesting question here. Given the location of Halley Creek, are your labor and other infrastructure issues relatively easy to resolve? Let me start with infrastructure. Absolutely. We are close to a major state highway with easy access to electricity as well. We have a nearby power plant that probably we will partner with. We have easy access from that state highway to a railroad for further transportation of product. So we're very confident of the infrastructure. And for labor, the sad part about Wyoming's mining story at the moment is, of course, that the coal industry is in decline. But what that means for us in developing this new strand of mining activity in the state of Wyoming is that we have a seasoned workforce that we can transform relatively easily through retraining programs with, for instance, the University of Wyoming, the community colleges throughout the state of Wyoming. Because fundamentally, coming back to what I said earlier about how this project will lend itself readily to open pit development, it's not too much different from the coal mines here in Wyoming, which are also open. So we have that skilled labor force with just a little retraining. We can probably bring those guys on board and keep the workers in Wyoming, which matters very much to not just the workers, but to the state as well. There's not that many people living in Wyoming. We're about 500,000 at any given time. So we obviously want to hang on to the folks that we've got. And by and large, most of the people that live in Wyoming want to stay in Wyoming. So that brings me to the point as well that we have strong support from the state government here in Wyoming. It's historically a pro-mining state, and we certainly have felt very welcome here as we have moved through exploration and now to this stage that we are currently in, preparing to launch the development of the project. So we very much appreciate that support from the government of Wyoming and also from the university in Laramie, the University of Wyoming. So speaking about moving towards development, what are we doing besides the drilling that I already mentioned? We are currently in the middle of a pre-permitting environmental and hydrology study process because obviously we want to know and ensure that hopefully we don't have any endangered or threatened species, flora or fauna. But if we do have those present, we want to begin now working with the appropriate authorities to ensure that we take appropriate measures to protect those threatened flora or fauna. And this includes, by the way, this study includes things like migratory birds and transitory waters. In some ways, we were really lucky here in Wyoming to have had such a long and harsh winter, because we've had substantial amounts of runoff that haven't been seen in the state for years. And that's been a real bonus for our environmental studies, because it's allowed us to literally physically see areas that we might not have otherwise been aware of as water resources. So that's definitely a good thing. We also are, as I mentioned, doing a hydrology study, because we're very aware that we live in the drought-stricken West. And you can have a really robust winter, as we did last year, and you have right now a wonderful green situation where the reservoirs are all full and the rivers are running fast, and even the creeks have a lot of water in them that have been dry for the last few years. But again, we know that one good winter does not change the drought. So we are looking to understand our water sources and begin to build our management program for water, looking actively at the latest technologies for water conservation and recycling. Our objective on the waterfront is to be as close as possible to a closed system. Right now, with current technology, there's no such thing as a totally closed system, but we want to get as close as we possibly can. So we have all of these exciting initiatives underway on the human resources side, on the drilling side, and on the preparing for development side. So let me just check my questions here before I move towards my next point. Very interesting question. Thank you for reminding me. The question is regarding the fact that Holly Creek was recently named as one of the top 10 rare earth deposits globally. And we obviously are extremely honored by that recognition of the strategic value of the resource. As I mentioned early in my comments, we know that it's massive in scope. And when developed fully and properly, which obviously is a course coming decades with a project of this size, it will demonstrate its value again and again in terms of supporting the U.S. economic transformation and national security objectives. Because as many of you on the call are aware, for instance, the Department of Defense has been instructed by Congress to establish a critical materials reserve in the United States. And we see that, particularly with the scale of our potential project, we can be a key contributor to that, as well as supporting the development of the aerospace and defense industries, which again, under congressional mandate, need to move aggressively away from sourcing any materials in China and therefore to the domestic markets. So we are hoping to enter the official permitting process early next year. We should have our first preliminary economic assessment, PEA, available in the first quarter. And therefore, we will be ready to launch into the permitting process. And allow me to say just quickly that I personally am enthusiastic about the permitting process, because we have an unprecedented level of bipartisan agreement in the Senate and the House for the need for permitting reform. And that doesn't mean, as some would allege, scrapping all of our environmental provisions. It's absolutely not that at all. And for us as a company, it's very important that those economic values be respected and fully integrated into our mind as we move forward. What permitting reform does mean is providing some certainty around the permitting process. Because today, when you file your initial application, you do so with absolutely no certainty of when the government agency will finish that process of evaluating your project, and when, therefore, you will be able to move on to the next government agency, because it is sequential. What a lot of the mining reform bills are looking at is simultaneous consideration by U.S. government agencies of a project request, and also setting a fixed time limit within which the government agencies must come back to the company with a yes or no decision. Now, there are various timeframes under consideration. Senator Joe Manchin has a bill that has actually come up for a vote a couple of times, and that bill proposes a 2-year time frame for the government to respond. And failure to respond would be treated as approval of the project. Now, as I mentioned, there are other draft versions of legislation circulating in both the House and the Senate, and there are varying timeframes, but what's encouraging is that they all include a timeframe, whether it's 6 years or 4 years or 2 years. To have that certainty would be key, not just for companies like ours looking to develop a mine, but also for investors, because part of the problem for investors right now is having no certainty on the horizon on when they will be able to recoup their investment. So I personally am enthusiastic as we look towards next year and look towards entering that permitting process, that we might be in an environment that will permit us to be able to develop the project in a reasonable time to bring it to market and meet the growing demands on both the economic and national security sides. Okay, just checking here. And related to this topic, a question: what U.S. government incentives can you access to develop your projects? We actually are also already participating in an important research cooperation with the United States government. We are the feedstock provider for research aimed at developing a cleaner and greener processing technology for rare earths. There are 2 strands of research, one of which is funded by the Department of Defense, the other of which is funded by the Department of Energy. The focus is the same on both of these research groups, looking to use genetically modified bacteria or enzymes to be able to identify and extract specific elements from concentrate. So to give you an example, let's say that we have a genetically modified amoeba that will only recognize and bind to neodymium, one of the key products for the EV industry. So that solution of bacteria would be injected into the concentrate. All of the bacteria that are trained to look for neodymium would bind to the neodymium in the concentrate solution and then separate that and drop it down, ready for processing. If this kind of bio-based technology comes to fruition, it will be huge. Huge for environmental aspects, so great for the ESG side of any mining company's business, including our own, but also will be potentially a great time saver and potentially a great money saver in the production and separation elements of the processing stream. Because, of course, if you can identify and separate the individual desired elements from the concentrate, it saves a couple of steps on the conventional processing circuit. That's why I say it would be faster as well as potentially less expensive. So we already have that privilege of being part of that project. But yeah, there are a lot of incentives embedded in the Infrastructure Reform Act, the IRA. Right now, the spending focus for most of the IRA monies has been in 2 areas. The first of which is developing processing and separation plants in the United States. Because one of the reasons that China has a virtual stranglehold on the global critical materials market is because they process rare earths. At the moment, even America's sole producing rare earth mine, MP Materials, has to send its concentrate to China for processing and separation and then get that product back here in the US. And that's the link that the US government wants to break. So 4 projects are underway right now. with funding from DoD, one of which is MP Materials. But there are also other companies that are building processing facilities in Texas. And that's going to be good news for all of the mines as they come along, because that will enable each project to decide whether the investment should be made in processing on site or whether you should just sell the concentrate for processing elsewhere. And it will break that hold that China has on the market. So that's a very important focus. The second focus area to date has been in skills training, because particularly rare earths, we need a lot of chemists. It's really a chemical equation that leads to successful processing of rare earth materials. And each deposit has its own unique characteristics that therefore mean that there's going to be tweaks in the processing of those particular rare earth deposits. So we need a lot of specialized chemists. We need a lot of, obviously, high-tech mine experts. We need more mine workers in general, the kind of folks who know how to remotely operate the heavy equipment or operate the heavy equipment in person. And the mining industry in America has been having a lot of trouble attracting people for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to get into here because I'm running short on time. But it truly is a labor force issue. And it's in many ways, it's a war for talent. So it's important that the U.S. government is working with universities and with companies to develop the necessary kinds of training programs that we need at all levels of our educational system. So until now, there has not been as much direct funding for development of a mine from the federal government. Some of the states have been helpful. Wyoming has a fund that we hope to access as we get into that development phase. And by the time we arrive at that development phase, it's very possible that the money from Washington will also be flowing towards actual mining development. Provisions have been made. It's very exciting that the Exim Bank, the Export-Import Bank, a few years back was given a mandate to also fund domestic projects, including in the mining industry, because that kind of seed capital can be very helpful in attracting investors and in helping to get over that uncertainty hurdle that we were talking about earlier in terms of current timing of permitting processes. So the Department of Energy also has some very exciting initiatives underway in terms of transforming the energy grid in the United States, which obviously relies heavily on critical materials. So Department of Energy is working with the rest of the administration to see if some of the funding that's dedicated to energy reform can also be used for developing mines in the United States whose output would be destined to support the transformation of the grid. So I think that there's a lot of possibility there. The government also has a project called Fast 41. And Fast 41 essentially is designed to be, in many ways, a template for permitting reform. Because essentially, a company taking part in Fast 41 submits one proposal, one unified proposal, that will be considered by all of the relevant government authorities. And once that company's submission is in place, the government comes back to the company and says, you will have your answer in, and then fill in the blank, which is variable depending on the nature of the company and the nature of the request. So there's right now, for instance, a company called South 32, which is in the Fast 41 process and has been told that it will have a decision in 4 years. So obviously everyone else in the industry, we're anxiously watching to see how Fast 41 seems to be working. And that could very well be a very viable option for us as we get closer to that actual entry into the permitting process. So I'm thinking that that's probably a lot of information. that I'm sort of tossing out there. Do we have any other questions? Because I can certainly talk a bit more about a couple of other aspects if there are no other questions. Okay, while you're thinking, I'm going to return to the human aspect of the company because I forgot one important thing, that we also are hiring a general counsel to position our company for an eventual arrival on the NASDAQ at the appropriate time. So it looks to me like my time is up. So if you have any other questions, you do know how to reach me. And I hope that you enjoyed today's presentation. I certainly enjoyed the opportunity